The air inside the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado Training Gymnasium hung thick with the scent of rubber mats, industrial disinfectant, and human exertion. A perfect California morning outside had given way to the artificial environment within fluorescent lights, humming overhead, the occasional squeak of athletic shoes on polished surfaces, and the controlled breathing of 24 sailors standing in a wide deferential circle. At the center of this human arena stood two figures. One commanded attention through volume and posture, the other through stillness. Look, sweetheart, I don't care what the new diversity quotas say. This is my mat. On my mat, you're a liability until you prove otherwise. And right now, all I see it is someone who's going to get a real operator killed. Is that clear? Lieutenant Commander Bradley Hayes adjusted his crisp training uniform with a practiced flick of his wrist. The fabric seemed to reject the ambient humidity that soaked everyone else's clothes. His voice carried to every corner of the cavernous space, deliberate in its projection. He stood with his feet slightly wider than his shoulders, hands clasped behind his back, in a stance that conveyed authority rather than military precision. Across from him, Specialist Alexandra Reeves said nothing. She simply stood with her weight distributed evenly, eyes fixed on Hayes with an expression that conveyed neither anger nor intimidation. Her uniform, unlike his, bore the subtle marks of actual use faded in places from sun and salt, yet meticulously maintained. Where Hayes was all sharp angles and loud pronouncements, Reeves was an exercise in controlled economy. Nothing about her screamed warrior. Nothing demanded a second glance, but someone was giving her that second glance. From the shadowed doorway of the gymnasium, Fleet Master Chief Victor Sullivan observed the scene with eyes that had witnessed 40 years of naval evolution. He saw what Lieutenant Commander Hayes, blinded by the shine of his own rank and prejudice, could not. Sullivan noted the way Reeves stood with her feet perfectly balanced, weight distributed with an unconscious grace that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. He registered how her gray eyes didn't merely look at Hayes, but scanned him, cataloging angles, noting posture, breathing patterns, and subtle weight shifts. It was the predatory stillness of someone who doesn't need to roar to be the most dangerous person in the room. The nervous snickering of younger sailors rippled through the gymnasium. Hayes had created his intended effect. He had established dominance in their eyes. Several nodded in agreement with his assessment, eager to align themselves with perceived authority. Sullivan's weathered face remained impassive, but his attention sharpened as Hayes circled Reeves like a showman working his audience. "You see, ladies and gentlemen," Hayes began, his voice adopting the rehearsed cadence of a lecturer, "the modern battlefield is no place for hesitation. It is a place of violence, of action, of immediate and overwhelming force. The principles we teach here in hand-to-hand combatives are not theoretical. They are the bedrock of survival." He paused, scanning the faces of the assembled sailors. Most were fresh from technical schools, still accustomed to classrooms and simulators rather than real combat situations. They watched with expressions ranging from rapt attention to uncomfortable awareness of the public spectacle unfolding before them. When your rifle runs dry, when the enemy is on top of you, when there is nothing left between you and oblivion but your training. Hayes continued, savoring the dramatic tension he'd created. That is when these techniques become the difference between coming home or not coming home at all. Sullivan shifted his position slightly, moving deeper into the gym while remaining inconspicuous. Something about the scene troubled him beyond Hayes's obvious unprofessionalism. There was a pattern here, one that had repeated itself ever since Hayes had transferred in from the Pentagon 3 months ago. Hayes turned back to Reeves, his smile tightening into a condescending smirk. "Which is why we cannot afford to carry dead weight. We cannot afford to lower our standards." He gestured to Reeves generically. "Specialist Reeves here, through no fault of her own, represents a statistical disadvantage. Smaller frame, lower muscle mass. It's simple biology, people. It's not an insult, it's a fact. And facts can get you killed if you ignore them." A few sailors chuckled, the low, uncomfortable sound of people aligning themselves with power rather than conviction. Reeves remained silent, her expression unchanged. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. Her breathing remained slow, and even a silent metronome counting down to a moment only she could foresee. But what was that hidden beneath her composed exterior? For the briefest moment as Hayes continued his performance, something flickered across Reeves's eyes. Not anger, not resentment, but something else. A memory, perhaps. In that fractional second, she wasn't standing on a training mat in Coronado. She was somewhere else, somewhere dark, somewhere where breath came in careful measures and life hung in the balance of perfect stillness, somewhere with the metallic scent of blood mixing with dust and cordite. Then it was gone and she was back on the mat, present and focused. Hayes, encouraged by the sailor's response and interpreting Reeves's silence as weakness, moved closer. So we're going to use the specialist to demonstrate a common grapple escape. This is a situation where a much larger, much stronger opponent has you pinned. Your technique has to be perfect. Your execution has to be flawless. He moved toward her, his movements telegraphed and overly dramatic. He grabbed her arm in a grip that was far too tight for a simple demonstration, a petty assertion of physical dominance. There is no room for error. Sullivan's jaw tightened imperceptibly. What troubled him was becoming clearer. This wasn't about training. This was personal for Hayes. But why the answer materialized in Sullivan's memory as he recalled the personnel file that had crossed his desk when Hayes was transferred to the base. Lieutenant Commander Bradley Hayes, former candidate for DevGru, rejected during the final selection phase. A man whose service record showed technical excellence, but whose psychological evaluation contained carefully worded concerns about adaptability and team integration. Hayes had been pursuing a dream of joining the elite SEAL Team 6, only to be deemed unsuitable. And now he was taking out that frustration on those he perceived as less deserving of the opportunity he'd been denied. In the center of the mat, Hayes began his lecture, his voice a droning monotone of technical jargon that he clearly enjoyed reciting. The attacker establishes a dominant frame here, he said, wrenching Reeves's arm to an awkward angle to emphasize his point. He uses his weight advantage to pin your arm, neutralizing your ability to strike or draw a secondary weapon. From here, he can control the engagement. He can strike, he can choke, he can create an opening to finish the fight. He glanced at Reeves with theatrical pity. For the defender, the options are limited. The window for a successful counter is fractions of a second. It requires explosive power, perfect timing, and a level of aggression that frankly must be drilled into you. Each movement was a small act of humiliation, a physical manifestation of his verbal disdain. He wanted the assembled sailors to see Reeves struggle. He wanted them to see her fail to prove his point that she didn't belong. What he didn't know, what Sullivan was beginning to suspect with growing certainty, was who exactly he had selected for his demonstration. In the back row of observers, a young petty officer third class named Martinez watched with growing discomfort. Unlike many of his peers, he wasn't laughing. His eyes moved between Hayes Reeves and then significantly to where Sullivan stood in the shadows. A moment of recognition passed between Martinez and the Master Chief. Sullivan gave the slightest of nods, confirming the young sailor's unspoken question. Yes, this was wrong. Yes, it was being noticed by command. Now, the standard academy counter involves creating space, Hayes continued, pushing his weight against Reeves. You are taught to shrimp your hips, to create a wedge with your knee, to try and break the posture of the attacker. He looked around at the nodding sailors. This is fine in theory, but theory and reality are two different things. Hayes leaned in closer to Reeves, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for the front row to hear. And the reality is someone your size will never generate the force to move someone my size. It's physics. He shoved her slightly, expecting her to stumble to lose her footing. She did not. Her body absorbed the force, her feet rooted to the mat as if she were carved from the same dense rubber. It was like shoving against a deeply set pylon. A flicker of annoyance crossed Hayes's face, a brief crack in his confident facade. The demonstration wasn't going according to his script. She was supposed to be reactive, off-balance, weak. Instead, she was a statue of calm, her body a perfect model of structural integrity. Sullivan saw it all, and now he was certain. The way Reeves maintained her center of gravity, the micro-adjustments she made to absorb force, the economy of movement. These weren't the habits of a regular sailor. These were the traits of someone with very specialized training. But who exactly was Alexandra Reeves? Hayes, frustrated by Reeves's composure, decided to escalate. Let's try a more dynamic scenario, he announced, his voice regaining its authoritative boom. The attacker isn't just holding you, he's striking. His free hand swung in a slow telegraphed arc towards her head, stopping just short of her face. You must control the striking limb, protect your head, and then only then can you attempt the escape. He repeated the motion a little faster this time, a little closer. Reeves's eyes tracked the movement, her head moving just enough to be out of the path of the simulated blow. Her economy of motion was almost supernatural. There was no wasted energy, no panic flinch. It was the calculated, precise response of a finely tuned machine. This infuriated Hayes. Her competence was a silent refutation of his entire thesis. Her calm was an insult to his authority. He needed to break it. He needed to force a reaction that would validate his prejudice. "You're not taking this seriously, specialist," Hayes snarled, his frustration finally boiling over. The pretense of a controlled academic demonstration was gone, replaced by raw ego. On the battlefield, there are no slow-motion attacks. There are no pulled punches. There's only this. In a shocking breach of training protocol, his hand didn't stop. It wasn't a full-force blow, but it was far more than a tap. His open palm connected with the side of her jaw with a sharp crack that echoed through the now silent gymnasium. It was a strike meant to stun, to humiliate, to force a yelp of pain or a show of fear. The crowd gasped as one. A line had been crossed. This was no longer training, it was assault. The nervous laughter died, replaced by tense, horrified silence. Every sailor in the room knew what they had just witnessed was wrong, a gross abuse of power. They looked at each other, eyes wide, then back at the two figures in the center of the mat. Hayes held his position, hands still in the air, a triumphant sneer on his face. He had gotten the reaction he wanted, not from her, but from the audience. He had proven his point about the harsh realities of combat, but he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had assumed her stillness was passivity. He had assumed her silence was fear. He had assumed her gender was a synonym for weakness. He was wrong on all counts. For a single eternal second, nothing happened. The sound of the slap hung in the air, a dissonant chord in the quiet room. Reeves's head had barely moved from the impact. During this suspended moment, another memory flashed through her consciousness, not of training, but of real combat. Of a night operation in Somalia 1990, part of a classified extension of Operation Gothic Serpent. Her unit had been tasked with extracting a high-value intelligence asset under heavy fire. The mission had gone sideways when their primary extraction route was compromised. In the chaos that followed, she had found herself separated from her team, face to face with an enemy combatant twice her size. There had been no time to draw a weapon, no room for error, just the pure, cold calculus of survival. That night, she had moved with the same clarity of purpose that now flowed through her body on this training mat. The memory dissolved as quickly as it had formed. Back in the present, Sullivan was already moving forward, recognizing what was about to happen, even as Hayes remained oblivious. And then it began. It was not a movement of anger or retaliation. It was a movement of pure, cold professional duty. It was the response of an apex predator that has been prodded one too many times. Reeves's body, which had been a study in placid stillness, became a blur of devastating efficiency. The hand Hayes was still gripping with such confidence suddenly had no wrist to hold. In a motion too fast to follow, she had rotated her palm, broken his grip, and established her own, securing his wrist with a thumb and forefinger on a precise pressure point. Simultaneously, her other hand, the one that had been hanging loosely at her side, came up not in a fist, but with fingers extended and rigid, striking the brachial plexus origin on the side of his neck. It wasn't a punch. It was a neurological shutdown command. Hayes's dominant arm went instantly numb, hanging uselessly at his side. A look of pure, uncomprehending shock washed over his face. Before he could even process the first two movements, she flowed into the third, stepping not away, but into him. She used her hip as a fulcrum, redirecting his forward momentum. Hayes was a big man, easily 60 pounds heavier than her. But physics, the very thing he had tried to lecture her on, was now her weapon. His center of gravity was compromised. His balance was gone. He was falling but not collapsing. She controlled his descent with terrifying precision, spinning under his now useless arm, ending up behind him. One arm snaked across his chest, her other hand cupping the back of his head. Hayes landed on the mat, not with a crash, but with a controlled thud flat on his back. Reeves was kneeling on his chest, one knee pinning his remaining good arm, her forearm pressed firmly against his windpipe. It was not a choke designed to render him unconscious. It was a pin, a position of absolute and total control. He could not move. He could not speak. He could barely breathe. The entire sequence from the moment he struck her to the moment he was neutralized on the mat had taken less than 2 seconds. A deafening silence descended upon the gymnasium. It was a silence filled with awe, with fear, with the sudden, violent shattering of 1,000 assumptions. The sailors stared mouths agape, minds struggling to reconcile the unassuming woman from moments before with the impossibly lethal force that had just been unleashed. Hayes lay on the mat, eyes wide with terror and disbelief, staring up at the calm, impassive face of the woman he had just assaulted. Her expression had not changed. There was no anger, no triumph, no emotion at all. There was only the quiet, focused competence of a professional who had just finished a job. Fleet Master Chief Sullivan now stood at the edge of the mat, his presence finally registering with the stunned audience. He moved with a slow, deliberate cadence that commanded attention without demanding it. His uniform was a testament to a lifetime of service. It was perfectly starched, but the ribbons above his pocket told a story of decades spent in the harshest corners of the world. His face was a roadmap of experience, his eyes holding a wisdom that could not be learned from books. He surveyed the scene with a practiced, all-encompassing gaze, taking in the stunned sailors Hayes gasping on the mat and the still, silent figure of Reeves, who remained in her position of control, her focus unbroken. Sullivan's voice, when it came, was not loud, but it cut through the thick silence like a razor. "Specialist, on your feet." It was a quiet command, but it held the weight of the entire fleet. Reeves disengaged from Hayes with the same fluid efficiency she had used to take him down. In one smooth motion, she was standing, hands loosely at her sides, posture once again relaxed but ready. She was not even breathing heavily. Hayes scrambled to his feet, shame and fury warring on his face. He opened his mouth to speak, to protest, to offer some blustering excuse, but Sullivan silenced him with a single sharp glance. His eyes were like chips of ice. "Not one word, Lieutenant Commander." The words were spoken with a finality that left no room for argument. Hayes's mouth snapped shut. Sullivan walked a slow circle around the two of them, his eyes missing nothing. He looked at the red mark beginning to form on Reeves's jaw. He looked at the terror that still lingered in Hayes's eyes. He looked at the faces of the young sailors who were just now beginning to process the lesson they had just received. He stopped directly in front of Reeves. He did not address the strike. He did not ask what had happened. He already knew. Instead, he looked at her stance, at the way she held herself. He looked at the technique she had just executed, a brutal but elegant cascade of movements that was not part of any standard Navy combative's curriculum. It was something else entirely, something refined and lethally pure. "Specialist Reeves," he said, his voice calm and inquisitive, "would you happen to know Master Chief Ortega?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, irrelevant to the situation at hand. But something flickered in Reeves's eye, recognition, perhaps even a hint of surprise. "Yes, Master Chief," she replied. Her voice, when it finally came, was steady and clear. It was the first time most of the sailors had heard her speak. "Master Chief Ortega was my advanced close-quarters combat instructor in 2018. Sullivan nodded slowly. "Jose Ortega," he said, as if tasting the name. "He developed that particular risk control counter during operations in Fallujah, modified it from a technique he learned from a South Korean intelligence operative. Not standard Navy training at all." His eyes never left Reeves, studying her with growing certainty. "In fact, I believe that particular technique is only taught to members of certain specialized units." The tension in the room shifted subtly. The sailors might not have understood the full implications of Sullivan's words, but they sensed something significant was unfolding. Hayes, too, seemed to realize that the conversation had moved beyond a simple training incident. Sullivan turned to his aide, a young petty officer who had followed him into the gymnasium, clutching a ruggedized military tablet. "Give me Specialist Reeves's service record. Full jacket, Tier 1 clearance." The aide's eyes widened slightly. Tier 1 was the highest level reserved for the most sensitive and classified personnel files in the entire armed forces. He quickly began tapping on the tablet screen. The room waited, the tension almost unbearable. The sailors held their breath. This was no longer about a training exercise gone wrong. This was something more. They were on the precipice of a revelation, a moment where the curtain would be pulled back on a world they knew existed but had never seen. Hayes stood rigidly, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He was beginning to understand that he had not just insulted a subordinate, he had stumbled into a world of shadows and secrets and had committed a grave error against one of its silent inhabitants. The quiet competence he had dismissed was about to be given a name, a history, and a legacy that would crush his own arrogance into dust. The aide's tablet beeped softly, indicating the file had been accessed after a series of biometric and password verifications. He handed the device to Sullivan. For a long moment, the only sound in the gymnasium was the distant hum of ventilation fans. The sailors watched Sullivan's face, trying to read his expression. It was unreadable at first, a mask of professional scrutiny. Then slowly a look of profound, almost reverent respect began to dawn in his eyes. He looked up from the tablet, not at Reeves, but at the assembled crowd. He was no longer just an observer. He was a teacher, and class was now in session. For the benefit of those of you who have clearly forgotten the most fundamental tenets of our service, he began, his voice resonating with quiet authority. Let me provide a lesson. The first tenet is respect. Respect for your shipmates, regardless of rank, gender, or appearance. The second is to never ever make assumptions. He paused, letting the words sink in. He then turned his gaze directly onto Hayes, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. You, Lieutenant Commander, have failed on both counts today. Spectacularly. Hayes swallowed hard but remained silent. Sullivan lifted the tablet. You assume that because Specialist Reeves is a woman, she is weak. You assume that because she is quiet, she is timid. You assume that because her rank is lower than yours, you had the right to disrespect and assault her in front of her peers. He took a step closer to Hayes, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. You did not see a warrior. You saw a target for your own insecurities. You were wrong. Sullivan turned back to the crowd. Let me tell you who you were looking at. He began to read from the tablet, his voice clear and precise, each word landing like a hammer blow. Name Reeves Alexandra J. Specialist, First Class. The room stirred. Specialist, not petty officer. It was a different pay grade scale, one used almost exclusively in the shadowy world of naval special warfare. Unit designation, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. A collective sharp intake of breath. DevGru, the formal name for SEAL Team 6. It was a unit so secretive that its very existence was often a matter of speculation. They were the tip of the spear's tip, the most elite operators in the entire U.S. military. The sailors stared at Reeves in stunned disbelief. This quiet, unassuming woman was one of them. It seemed impossible. Combat Deployments 7. Theaters of Operation classified. Mission sets classified. Sullivan continued, his voice relentless. Special skills qualifications, advanced close quarters, combat instructor, master breacher, covert methods of entry specialist, Tier 1 operator. He lowered the tablet and looked directly at Reeves. He saw the faint silvery scar just above her eyebrow, a detail he hadn't noticed before. He saw the coiled readiness in her frame. He saw the ghost of 100 battles in her calm gray eyes. He saw a professional. Then, in a gesture that sent a shockwave through the room, Fleet Master Chief Sullivan, a living legend with 30 years of service, a man who advised admirals, snapped to the most rigid and formal position of attention. He raised his hand in a sharp, perfect salute. Specialist Reeves, he said, his voice ringing with a respect so profound it was almost tangible. My apologies for the unprofessional conduct of my officer. It will be dealt with. Thank you for your demonstration. The world had just been turned upside down. The institutional hierarchy, the very foundation of their world, had been inverted. A Master Chief was saluting a specialist. And in that moment, everyone understood. They were not in the presence of a sailor. They were in the presence of a legend. But what no one in that gymnasium knew, not even Sullivan, was that Alexandra Reeves' story was just beginning. The incident on the training mat would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge not just Hayes' preconceptions, but the very structure of the elite units to which Reeves belonged. Because there are no small ripples when legends collide with reality. There are only waves that change the landscape forever, and the tide was just beginning to turn. The legend of Alexander Alex Reeves spread through Naval Amphibious Base Coronado not like wildfire, but like a pressure wave from a distant explosion. Silent and visible, but powerful enough to shatter glass. It traveled through whispered conversations in mess halls, hushed tones in barracks, after lights out, and the sudden, respectful silences that fell whenever she entered a room. The story became modern folklore, a piece of institutional mythology passed from sailor to sailor. It was told in 100 different ways, with each telling adding a new layer of mythic detail. In some versions, she had taken down 3 lieutenants. In others, she had done it blindfolded. The core of the story, however, remained unchanged. Quiet competence had faced loud arrogance, and arrogance had been left gasping on the mat. The sailors who had been there that day became minor celebrities in their own right, keepers of the true story. They were sought out, asked to recount every detail. They described the sound of the slap, the impossible speed of her movements, the deafening silence that followed. But most of all, they described the look on Fleet Master Chief Sullivan's face as he read her file, the dawning realization, the profound respect. And they spoke of his salute, a gesture that had corrected the moral compass of the entire base. Lieutenant Commander Hayes had vanished. One day he was running the training schedule. The next his office was empty. The official word was that he had been reassigned to a staff position at the Pentagon, a promotion on paper that was in reality a form of exile. He was sent to a world of paper and politics far from the operational world he so desperately wanted to be part of. For Reeves, however, life went on with little outward change. She continued to attend training sessions, now treated with a deference that seemed to amuse her more than anything else. She spoke when necessary, executed tasks with the same quiet precision, and avoided the spotlight whenever possible. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. The incident in the gymnasium had broken her cover, exposed her true identity in a way that complicated her current assignment. 30 days after the incident, Reeves sat alone in a private briefing room, waiting for Sullivan to arrive. The room was secure, swept for electronic surveillance every morning, its walls specially constructed to prevent sound from escaping. On the table before her lay a single manila folder with a red diagonal stripe across it, classified material, eyes only. When Sullivan entered, he closed the door carefully behind him, ensuring the magnetic seal engaged. "Specialist," he said by way of greeting, taking a seat across from her. "Master Chief," she replied, her posture relaxed but attentive. Sullivan studied her for a moment. The red mark on her jaw, where Hayes had struck her, was long gone, leaving no trace. She looked exactly as she had that first day, unassuming, professional, contained. "I spoke with Admiral Carson this morning." Sullivan began, referring to the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. "He sends his regards." Reeves nodded but said nothing. "He also expressed some concern about your current situation. The incident with Hayes has generated more attention than anticipated. It complicates your recovery period." Now Reeves shifted slightly, the only indication that the conversation had touched a sensitive topic. The full truth, known only to a select few, was that Reeves wasn't at Coronado simply as an instructor. She was there to recover, to heal, to step back from the operational tempo that had consumed the last 7 years of her life. Her most recent deployment, a classified extraction mission in northern Iraq that had gone catastrophically wrong, had left physical wounds that had healed and psychological ones that were still raw. "I'm fine, Master Chief," she said, her voice even. "The attention will die down." Sullivan didn't contradict her directly. "Perhaps, but until then your presence here serves as a distraction. For others and possibly for yourself." He opened the folder between them, revealing a series of photographs. They showed a desert landscape, low mountains in the background, a small compound of buildings arranged in a rough square. "This was the target in Mosul," Sullivan said quietly. 8 months ago." Reeves's expression didn't change, but her eyes fixed on the images with an intensity that spoke volumes. "You were the assault team leader. The intelligence said 3 hostages, 4 guards. When you arrived, there were 12 combatants, no hostages. They were waiting for you." Now a muscle in Reeves's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We lost Thompson and Ramirez that night," she said, the first time she had acknowledged the mission aloud since the debriefing. Sullivan nodded. "You carried Ramirez 2 miles to the extraction point, despite having a broken collarbone and a bullet lodged in your thigh. He would have done the same for me." "That's not the point, Specialist." Sullivan's voice remained gentle but firm. "The point is that what happened that night wasn't your fault. Bad intelligence compromised sources. You made every right decision given what you knew." Reeves looked away, her eyes finding the neutral space of the wall. "I hear the gunfire sometimes," she admitted so quietly that Sullivan had to lean forward to catch the words. "At night, or when a helicopter flies overhead. I keep seeing Thompson's face when the second charge went off. He didn't look scared. He looked surprised. It was the most emotion she had revealed since arriving at Coronado. The admission hung in the air between them, a rare glimpse behind her carefully maintained professional facade. Sullivan let the moment breathe, understanding the significance of what she had shared. That's why you're here, Reeves. Not as punishment, not because anyone doubts your capabilities, but because even the finest blades need time for the steel to settle after being reforged. He closed the folder and placed his hand on it. What happened with Hayes was unfortunate, but it revealed something important. You're still processing that night in Mosul. Your reaction to Hayes wasn't just skill, it was instinct driven by something unresolved. Reeves considered this, then nodded once, accepting the assessment. So what now? Sullivan slid a second folder across the table, this one bearing a different classification marking. Now we adjust. Admiral Carson and I agree that keeping you in a standard instructional role no longer serves its purpose. We're assigning you to a specialized training cadre. Limited exposure, higher security clearance for all participants. Reeves opened the folder and scanned its contents. Advanced close quarters, battle for SEAL candidates. Specifically those in the final selection phase for DevGru. These operators already know what you are, who you are. There's no need for cover stories or pretense. You can be fully present in your expertise. Sullivan paused, watching her absorb the information. And one more thing, you'll be working alongside Dr. Catherine Chen. Now Reeves did react, looking up sharply. The combat psychologist from Walter Reed. The same. She's developed a new approach to operational stress management. The program integrates psychological resilience training directly into tactical exercises. The idea is that we stop treating the mind and body as separate battlefields. Reeves was silent for a long moment, weighing the implications. Working with Dr. Chen meant acknowledging that she needed help, that the night in Mosul had left marks deeper than physical scars. This isn't optional, is it, Master Chief? Sullivan's weathered face softened slightly. Would it make a difference if it was? A ghost of a smile touched Reeves's lips. Probably not. Then let's call it a professional development opportunity. Besides, Sullivan added, Dr. Chen specifically requested you after reading the after-action report from Mosul. She said, and I quote, anyone who can make those decisions under that kind of pressure has a psychological framework worth studying. Reeves considered this, then nodded. When do I start? Tomorrow, 0600 Training Facility Bravo. Sullivan rose to leave, then paused. One more thing, Specialist. The selection class includes someone you should be aware of. He handed her one final document. Lieutenant Junior Grade William Hayes, recently commissioned from the enlisted ranks, currently in consideration for DevGru. Reeves looked up, surprise evident in her expression. Any relation to his older brother? Sullivan's expression was unreadable. And before you ask, yes, he's aware of what happened between you and his brother. The entire family is career Navy. Their father is Captain James Hayes, commanding the USS Abraham Lincoln. That complicates things. Life usually does, Sullivan agreed. But I trust your professionalism, Specialist. And who knows, maybe this Hayes will prove the exception to the family rule. With that, Sullivan gathered the classified materials and left Reeves alone with her thoughts. The next morning dawned clear and cold, unusual for Southern California. A heavy marine layer had rolled in overnight, shrouding the coast in a mist that muffled sounds and limited visibility to a few hundred yards. Training Facility Bravo was isolated from the main part of the base, situated along a stretch of coastline reserved for special warfare training. The facility itself resembled a small village with structures designed to simulate various urban combat environments. At its center stood a 3-story concrete building known as the Kill House, where operators practiced room clearing and hostage rescue scenarios. Reeves arrived at 0545, preceding even the instructional staff. She spent the extra time walking the perimeter of the facility, reacquainting herself with the layout, noting changes that had been made since her last visit 3 years earlier. It was a habit formed during years of operations. Know your environment, identify exits, plan contingencies. By 0600, the training cadre had assembled. 10 instructors, all former or current DevGru operators, men with the quiet confidence that came from proven experience rather than bluster. They nodded to Reeves with the simple acknowledgement of equals, no salutes or ceremony necessary in this company. The lead instructor, Master Chief Petty Officer Santiago, gave a brief operational overview. 16 candidates, final phase of selection. Today we evaluate close quarters battle proficiency under stress conditions. Dr. Chen has added physiological monitoring and will introduce variables to test decision-making under duress. He nodded to a slender Asian American woman standing off to the side who acknowledged the reference with a slight bow of her head. Dr. Catherine Chen looked more like a university professor than someone accustomed to working with special operators, but her eyes held the same analytical sharpness that Reeves had observed in the most effective intelligence officers. Specialist Reeves will observe first rotation, then integrate as opposition force for scenarios 3 through 6. Santiago continued. Questions? There were none. This group communicated in the economic language of professionals who understood their roles without need for elaboration. The candidates arrived at EO 6:30, moving with the disciplined precision expected of men at this stage of selection. They formed up in 4 ranks of 4, silent and attentive, their faces betraying no emotion despite the early hour and the fog that continued to cling to the ground. Santiago briefed them with the same efficiency he had shown with the instructional staff. Gentlemen, today's evolution focuses on close quarters battle with environmental and psychological complications. You will operate in 4-man teams clearing structures with unknown numbers of hostiles and non-combatants. Rules of engagement will shift during the operation. Analytical decision-making under stress is the primary metric for evaluation. He gestured toward Dr. Chen and Reeves. Dr. Chen is observing cognitive function during tactical operations. Specialist Reeves will evaluate your close quarters battle technique and serve as opposition force in later scenarios. Both are authorized to terminate your involvement at any point if they observe unsafe tactics or decision paralysis. The candidate's eyes flickered to Reeves' recognition dawning on several faces. The story of what had happened with Lieutenant Commander Hayes had clearly reached even this isolated phase of training. Reeves met their gazes impassively, neither acknowledging nor rejecting the unspoken awareness. All except one. In the back row, a figure stood slightly taller than the others. His posture was textbook perfect, his expression controlled. But his eyes, when they met Reeves's, contained something else. Not the wary respect of the others, but a cold, calculating assessment. Lieutenant Junior Grade William Hayes had his brother's features, but none of his brother's transparent emotion. Where Bradley Hayes had been all-surface bluster, this younger Hayes projected a contained intensity that Reeves found far more concerning. The day progressed through a series of increasingly complex scenarios. The candidates rotated through the kill house in their 4-man teams, confronting situations designed to stress their tactical decision-making. Hidden speakers blasted the sounds of combat at unpredictable intervals. Smoke machines reduced visibility. Role players acted as hostile forces, non-combatants, wounded teammates. Reeves observed from a catwalk above the main training floor, making notes on a ruggedized tablet. Dr. Chen stood beside her, monitoring physiological data from sensors attached to the candidates' bodies. Interesting group, Chen commented during a brief lull. High baseline technical proficiency, but I'm seeing significant variance in stress response patterns. Reeves nodded. Team 3 has the best tactical flow. They move like they've operated together before. And Team 4, Chen asked, referring to the group that included Lieutenant Hayes. Technically sound, but something's off with their communication. Hayes anticipates his teammates' movements instead of responding to them. He's operating on a parallel track, not an integrated one. Chen made a note. That tracks with his biometrics. His heart rate and cortisol levels barely fluctuate regardless of the scenario. Either he has exceptional control or he's not fully present in the operation. Reeves finished. He's going through motions instead of responding to the environment. The psychologist glanced at Reeves with newfound interest. You have a good eye for cognitive state specialist. It's survival, Reeves replied simply. In the field, knowing where your teammate's mind is can be as important as knowing where their body is. After the 4th rotation, Santiago called for a brief rest period. The candidates moved to a covered area outside the kill house, hydrating and comparing notes in low voices. Hayes remained slightly apart from his team, his attention seemingly focused inward. Reeves descended from the observation catwalk, preparing to transition to her role as opposition force for the afternoon scenarios. As she crossed the training yard, Hayes detached from his position and intercepted her path. Specialist Reeves, he said, his voice controlled and formal. A moment, if I may. Reeves stopped, noting the careful distance Hayes maintained between them. Respectful but not deferential. Lieutenant, she acknowledged, I wanted to address the situation with my brother directly, Hayes said without preamble. What happened between you was unfortunate, but not surprising. Bradley has always confused aggression with effectiveness. It was not what Reeves had expected. An apology, perhaps, or a subtle expression of resentment. This clinical assessment of his own brother caught her off guard. That's a candid assessment, Lieutenant. Hayes's expression didn't change. Family connections don't excuse professional failings. If anything, they demand higher standards. There was something rehearsed about the statement, as if Hayes had prepared it specifically for this encounter. Reeves studied him, trying to reconcile the cold precision of the man before her with what she had observed during the morning's training. Your tactical performance is solid, she said, shifting the conversation, but you're anticipating rather than responding. That creates vulnerability if the situation deviates from expectation. If Hayes was surprised by her direct critique, he didn't show it. I'll take that under advisement, Specialist. Before Reeves could respond, Santiago signaled the end of the break. Hayes gave a crisp nod and returned to his team, leaving Reeves with the distinct impression that the brief exchange had been a performance designed for her benefit. The afternoon scenarios introduced new levels of complexity. Reeves, now dressed in nondescript black tactical gear, with her face obscured by a mask, became part of the opposition force. Her role was to present the candidates with a highly skilled adversary who could exploit tactical mistakes in ways that standard role players could not. The first team to face this new challenge performed adequately, making only minor errors that Reeves exploited to eliminate 2 of their 4 members before they completed the objective. The second team fared better, losing only 1 operator while successfully clearing the structure. Team 4 with Hayes entered the kill house at 15:30. The scenario was complex, a multi-room structure with an unknown number of hostiles, potential hostages, and intelligence materials to be secured. Adding to the difficulty, the team would be operating with limited communication as the scenario simulated radio interference. From her concealed position on the second floor, Reeves watched through specialized eyewear that allowed her to see in the artificially darkened environment. Team 4 moved with textbook precision, clearing rooms methodically and communicating through hand signals. Hayes led from the second position, directing the team's movement with subtle gestures. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. It was impressive, but Reeves noted the same issues she had observed earlier. Hayes was executing a predetermined plan rather than responding to the environment. When the team reached the central stairwell, Reeves made her move. Using the building's air ducts as concealed transit, she positioned herself to create an unexpected threat. As the point man began to ascend the stairs, Reeves triggered a small smoke canister, filling the stairwell with obscurant. The team reacted quickly, the point man dropping to a knee to present a smaller target, while the rear security maintained their sectors. Hayes signaled for a tactical retreat to reassess a textbook response to the changing situation. It was exactly what Reeves had anticipated. As the team began their controlled withdrawal, she executed a flanking maneuver through a maintenance access panel emerging behind their position. In a real operation, it would have been a fatal mistake for the team. But instead of eliminating the rear security with the training weapon as expected, Reeves encountered something unusual. Hayes had adjusted his position, covering not just his assigned sector, but also the maintenance access that shouldn't have been on the briefing diagrams. Their eyes met through the smoke for a fraction of a second. There was no surprise in Hayes' expression. He had anticipated her movement not because he was rigidly following a script, but because he had identified and accounted for a vulnerability that even the scenario designers had overlooked. It was an impressive display of tactical awareness, one that spoke to natural talent rather than just trained proficiency. The remainder of the scenario played out with the same unexpected adaptability from Hayes. Each time Reeves created a complication, he adjusted with fluid precision, enabling his team to complete the objective despite the escalating challenges. By the end of the day, Team 4 had achieved the highest performance metrics, with Hayes individually scoring in the top percentile for tactical decision-making under pressure. As the candidates were dismissed for the evening, Durchen approached Reeves with a puzzled expression. Something changed with Hayes in that last scenario, she observed. His earlier biometric readings showed minimal stress response, almost as if he were disconnected from the situation. But when you introduced the smoke element, his patterns shifted dramatically. Heightened awareness increased neural activity, but controlled cortisol and adrenaline. It's the pattern we typically see in operators at their peak performance state. Reeves considered this, recalling the moment of eye contact through the smoke. It's like he was going through the motions until he encountered a worthy opponent. Then he fully engaged. Interesting psychological profile, Chen mused. Potentially concerning for team integration, but valuable for certain types of operations. I'll want to monitor him closely during tomorrow's scenarios. The next morning brought clear skies and warmer temperatures, the marine layer having retreated overnight. The training schedule called for more complex scenarios, including extended operations with sleep deprivation and sensory complications. Reeves arrived early again, but this time she found Hayes already at the facility, engaged in what appeared to be a private warm-up routine. He moved through a series of fluid motions that Reeves recognized as a hybrid of martial arts forms adapted for tactical application. She observed silently, noting the precision of his movements and the controlled rhythm of his breathing. This wasn't for show. It was a genuine preparation ritual, one developed through years of disciplined practice. When he finished, Hayes acknowledged her presence with a nod. Specialist, Lieutenant, you're here early. I find it helpful to recalibrate before complex operations, he replied, wiping his face with a small towel. Mental alignment affects physical execution. The statement could have sounded pretentious, but Hayes delivered it with matter-of-fact simplicity. Your performance yesterday was impressive, Reeves has said, particularly your adaptation to the maintenance access flanking route. Hayes paused, seeming to consider his response carefully. I studied the architectural plans for these training structures during my preparatory phase. The access panel was a logical inclusion, even if it wasn't on the briefing documents. That's thorough preparation. It's necessary preparation, Hayes countered. In my experience, the difference between success and failure is often found in the details others consider insignificant. There was something in his tone that gave Reeves pause. It wasn't arrogance, but a kind of detached certainty that reminded her of operators who had seen too much too young. How long were you deployed before officer candidacy? She asked, starting tack. 3 tours with SEAL Team 3, primarily northern Iraq and Syria. His answer was precise, revealing nothing beyond the basic facts. Before Reeves could probe further, the rest of the training cadre began to arrive, and the moment for private conversation passed. The day's scenarios built upon the previous day's foundations, but with significant escalations in complexity. The candidates now had to operate under simulated sleep deprivation, with chemical irritants introduced to the environment and unexpected changes to the rules of engagement. Team 4 continued to perform at a high level, with Hayes demonstrating the same adaptive problem-solving that had distinguished him the previous day. But Reeves noticed something else emerging in his leadership style, a tendency to isolate difficult tasks to himself rather than distributing them among the team. During a particularly challenging breach scenario, Hayes took point in position despite the tactical plan calling for him to direct from the second position. When questioned about this deviation during the post-scenario debrief, his response was revealing. The breach point presented the highest risk factor. I assessed my technical proficiency as superior for that specific task. Santiago, conducting the debrief, pressed the point. And if your assessment was incorrect, if you were incapacitated at the breach point, the operation would have been compromised, Hayes acknowledged without hesitation. I considered it an acceptable risk given the parameters. Acceptable to whom, Lieutenant? To your team, to the mission planners, or just to you? For the first time, Reeves saw a crack in Hayes' composed facade. A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, or frustration crossed his features before he reasserted control. To the mission, Master Chief. The objective was to secure the intelligence materials with minimum collateral damage. My approach optimized for that outcome. Santiago exchanged a glance with Dr. Chen, who made a note on her tablet. The exchange wasn't lost on Hayes, whose jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. After the debrief, Reeves found herself walking alongside Dr. Chen as they moved toward the facility's command center for the midday assessment. Hayes is problematic, Chen said without preamble. Exceptional skills, but his psychological profile shows concerning patterns. He takes too many risks on himself, Reeves observed. Chen nodded. It's more than that. His biometric readings during team planning sessions show minimal engagement. But when he's executing individually critical tasks, his neural patterns light up. He's addicted to being the linchpin, the irreplaceable element. That's not uncommon in special operations candidates, Reeves pointed out. The selection process tends to favor those who push beyond normal limits. True but healthy operators learn to channel that drive within the team structure. Hayes isolates it. In psychological terms, he's not building team redundancy, he's creating dependency. Reeves considered this assessment. You think he's deliberately making himself essential to ensure his selection? I think he may not even be conscious of the pattern, Chen replied. But yes, that's the effect. And it's potentially dangerous in an operational context where the team's survival might depend on distributed capability rather than individual heroics. The conversation stayed with Reeves as the day progressed into its final evolution, a complex hostage rescue scenario involving multiple structures, environmental hazards, and time-critical objectives. For this exercise, the candidates were reorganized into new teams, deliberately separating established partnerships to test adaptability. Hayes was assigned as team leader for a composite unit drawn from members who had performed well individually but hadn't worked together previously. Reeves, once again serving as a high-value opposition force target, positioned herself in the most defensible section of the compound. Her role was to present the final challenge, a skilled adversary protecting a critical intelligence asset. The scenario began at dusk, adding natural low-light conditions to the already complex operation. From her concealed position, Reeves monitored the approach of the various teams through remote cameras positioned throughout the training area. Hayes's team moved differently from the others. Where most groups adopted standard formation procedures, Hayes had arranged his team in an unusual configuration that maximized coverage while minimizing exposed angles. It was unorthodox but effective, allowing them to advance more rapidly than the other units. When they reached the main compound, Hayes again deviated from standard doctrine. Instead of establishing a perimeter and conducting systematic clearing operations, he directed a focused penetration toward the most likely location of the high-value target, Reeves's position. It was a gamble sacrificing comprehensive security for speed and surprise. In a real operation, such a decision would be high risk, potentially exposing the team to ambush or leaving civilians in danger. But if successful, it could achieve the primary objective before the opposition had time to react. From her position, Reeves watched the tactical gambit unfold with professional interest. Hayes was demonstrating the kind of decisive risk assessment that characterized the most effective special operations leaders. But was it brilliance or recklessness? The answer came moments later when Hayes's team encountered an unexpected complication. One of the role players, acting as a civilian non-combatant, suffered a genuine medical emergency. The man collapsed, clutching his chest in what appeared to be real distress rather than simulated injury. Immediately, the training safety officers moved to suspend the scenario, activating their distinctive red signal lights. But Hayes was already responding, directing one of his team members, who Reeves knew from the personnel files was a former combat medic, to attend to the civilian while maintaining tactical security with the remainder of the unit. It was the correct response, prioritizing genuine human safety while not completely abandoning the tactical situation. What impressed Reeves, however, was not just the decision itself, but the seamless way Hayes integrated this unexpected reality into his operational framework. There was no hesitation, no moment of confusion between training and reality. He simply adjusted, demonstrating the kind of adaptable decision-making that defined elite operators. The medical emergency was resolved quickly. The role player had experienced heat exhaustion rather than anything more serious, and the scenario was officially suspended for safety evaluation. But the incident had revealed something important about Lieutenant William Hayes. Later that evening, after the candidates had been dismissed and the training staff was conducting their daily review, Reeves shared her observations with Sullivan, who had arrived to evaluate the program's progress. Hayes is exceptional, she admitted. His technical proficiency is top tier, and his adaptability under pressure is remarkable. Sullivan nodded. But there's something beneath the surface that concerns me. He operates as if he has something to prove, something separate from the mission objectives. You think it's about his brother, about living up to the family legacy? Reeves considered this. Partially, but it's more complex than simple sibling rivalry. When I watch him operate, I see someone who's not just trying to excel, he's trying to redefine the standard. Sullivan's weathered face creased in thought. That's not necessarily a negative trait for a DevGru candidate. No, Reeves agreed, but it depends on the motivation behind it. Is he pushing boundaries to advance the mission capability or to satisfy some personal need that might eventually compromise operational security? And which do you believe it is, specialist? Reeves was silent for a moment, thinking back to the moment in the smoke-filled stairwell when their eyes had met, to the controlled precision of Hayes's movements during his morning routine, to the immediate clarity of his response during the medical emergency. I'm not certain yet, she finally admitted, but I think the answer might be crucial to understanding whether he belongs in DevGru or not. Sullivan studied her with a perceptive gaze that had made him legendary among the enlisted ranks. You see something of yourself in him, don't you? The question caught Reeves off guard. Sir, the drive, the precision, the need to be the critical factor in high-stakes situations. Before Mosul, that described you pretty accurately. Wash Reeves didn't immediately respond, the comparison striking closer to home than she had anticipated. Perhaps that's why you're the right person to evaluate him, Sullivan continued. You understand the fine line between exceptional commitment and dangerous obsession because you've walked it yourself. The next morning, Reeves arrived at the training facility with a revised approach in mind. If she was going to properly assess Hayes's suitability for DevGru, she needed to push beyond standard evaluation protocols. She found Santiago at the command center reviewing the day's training plan. I want to make a change to the final scenario, she said without preamble. A specific complication for Lieutenant Hayes's team. Santiago raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? I want to simulate a critical team casualty early in the operation. Specifically, I want Hayes himself to be designated as wounded and unable to physically participate in the direct action phase. You want to take him out of the equation and see how he handles it, Santiago surmised. Exactly, his technical skills are proven. What I need to evaluate is how he functions when he can't be the decisive operator, when he has to trust others to execute the critical elements. Santiago considered this for a moment, then nodded. I'll coordinate with Dr. Chen. She'll want to monitor his psychological response to this particular stressor. When the candidates assembled that morning, there was a palpable tension in the air. Word had spread that today's final scenario would determine who continued to the last phase of DevGru selection. The stakes were real, and it showed in the focused intensity of every operator present. Hayes stood slightly apart from the others, as had become his habit. His eyes met Reeves's briefly as she passed a silent acknowledgement between two professionals who had taken each other's measure. The day progressed through a series of increasingly difficult evolutions leading up to the final scenario, a complex hostage extraction from a multi-level structure with numerous adversaries and environmental complications. Teams would be evaluated on tactical execution, decision-making under pressure, and adherence to mission parameters. When Hayes's team entered the preparation area for their final briefing, Reeves was waiting alongside Santiago and Dr. Chen. The four operators came to attention, their expressions betraying nothing of the pressure they surely felt. Lieutenant Hayes, Santiago began, your team's objective is to extract the high-value intelligence asset from the target structure while neutralizing hostile forces and minimizing collateral damage to non-combatants. Standard rules of engagement apply. Hayes nodded, his focus absolute. Understood, Master Chief. There is one additional parameter for this evolution, Santiago continued. Based on intelligence analysis, we have reason to believe the opposition is specifically prepared for your team profile. To counter this, we're designating you as wounded during the initial phase. For the first time, Hayes's composure slipped, a brief flash of surprise crossing his features before he reasserted control. What are the specifics of this simulated injury, Master Chief? Right arm incapacitated, mobility reduced to 70%. You'll wear a restrictive brace to simulate the limitation. You can communicate and direct, but you cannot personally engage in direct action requiring two functioning arms. Hayes processed this information rapidly, his mind visibly recalculating approaches. Time frame for the limitation. Duration of the operation. Consider it a permanent condition for planning purposes. The implications were clear. Hayes would have to rely entirely on his team for the physical execution of the mission's most critical elements. He could not be the decisive operator at the crucial moment. Dr. Chen watched his reaction closely, her tablet discreetly monitoring his physiological responses. Reeves observed too, noting the minute adjustments in Hayes's posture, the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible change in his breathing pattern. This was the true test, not of Hayes's physical capabilities or tactical knowledge, but of his ability to trust others with the mission's success, to subordinate his need for personal control to the greater objective. Understood, Hayes said after the briefest of pauses. Permission to adjust the tactical plan accordingly. Granted, Santiago replied. You have 20 minutes for replan. Execution begins at 1400 hours. As Hayes led his team to the planning area, Reeves exchanged a glance with Dr. Chen. His initial stress indicators spiked dramatically, Chen noted quietly. But he stabilized almost immediately. Impressive control. The real test will be during execution, Reeves replied, when the plan meets reality and he can't personally intervene. The 20 minutes of planning passed quickly. Through the monitoring system, Reeves observed Hayes working with his team, reorganizing their approach to account for his simulated disability. What impressed her was not just the technical adjustments, but the way he engaged each team member, drawing out their strengths and integrating them into a cohesive plan that no longer centered on his personal execution. It was a different Hayes than she had observed in previous scenarios, one who seemed to have intuitively grasped the purpose of the limitation and adjusted not just tactically, but philosophically. At precisely 1400 hours, the scenario began. Hayes, now wearing a restrictive brace that immobilized his right arm and limited his movement, led his team toward the objective. From the command center, Reeves and Chen monitored their progress through multiple camera feeds and communication channels. The operation unfolded with unexpected smoothness. Hayes positioned himself where he could observe and direct, using his experience to guide without physically intervening. When complications arose and Reeves had ensured there were many, he calmly adjusted the plan, trusting his team to execute while he maintained the strategic overview. It was masterful leadership, the kind that couldn't be taught but had to be developed through experience and self-awareness. Hayes had transformed what could have been a crippling limitation into a tactical advantage, using his forced removal from direct action to enhance his awareness of the entire operational picture. When the scenario concluded successfully with the intelligence assets secured and all objectives met, Reeves found herself reassessing her earlier concerns. Hayes had demonstrated not just tactical brilliance, but the rarer quality of adaptive leadership, the ability to subordinate personal capability to mission success. As the candidates were dismissed for the day, with final evaluations to be delivered the following morning, Reeves sought out Dr. Chen for her professional assessment. His performance today contradicted many of our concerns, Reeves admitted. Chen nodded thoughtfully. It was revealing. When forced to operate from a position of physical limitation, his psychological patterns showed remarkable adaptation. Instead of the stress spikes we'd expect from someone addicted to control, he displayed the neural patterns associated with high-level strategic thinking. So your assessment is positive. Cautiously so, Chen replied. I'd want to see more data points, but today's evolution suggests he has the potential for balanced operational leadership, not just exceptional individual execution. Reeves considered this, thinking back to her initial impressions of Lieutenant William Hayes. There was still something enigmatic about him, something that didn't quite align with the straightforward profile of a special operator, however talented. I'd like to speak with him privately before the final evaluation, she decided. There's something I need to understand better. Chen studied her with professional interest. This feels personal for you, Specialist. May I ask why Yemang? Reeves was silent for a moment, considering the question. Because I see patterns that remind me of myself before Mosul. Patterns I need to address in my own recovery. Perhaps understanding Hayes will help me understand my own path forward. Chen's expression softened with professional empathy. That's a remarkably self-aware observation, Specialist. For what it's worth, I think you're both exceptional operators with the potential for extraordinary service or extraordinary self-destruction. The difference may come down to whether you can recognize and integrate the parts of yourselves that exist beyond the mission parameters. The conversation left Reeves with much to consider as she prepared for her final evaluation of Lieutenant William Hayes and perhaps her own path back to operational readiness. What neither of them yet realized was that their professional assessment was about to be tested in ways no training scenario could simulate. For across the base, an urgent communication was being routed to Fleet Master Chief Sullivan's secure terminal, a flash priority message that would soon draw both Reeves and Hayes into a situation where their complementary skills would face the ultimate operational test. The line between training and reality was about to blur, and the consequences would echo far beyond the confines of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The morning sun cast long shadows across the base as Specialist Alexandra Reeves made her way to the private meeting she had arranged with Lieutenant William Hayes. Their final day of evaluation had arrived, and before submitting her formal assessment, she needed to resolve the lingering questions that troubled her professional judgment. The meeting place was deliberately chosen a small observation point overlooking the Pacific Ocean, far from the training facilities and administrative buildings. It offered both privacy and a neutral ground where rank and roll might momentarily dissolve in favor of honest communication. Hayes was already there when she arrived, standing with the parade ground posture at the railing gazing out at the endless blue horizon. He acknowledged her approach with a slight nod, but maintained his outward focus. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Lieutenant." Reeves began joining him at the railing. "Your request was professional courtesy specialist. I understand the importance of thorough evaluation." The formality in his tone suggested the defensive posture of a man who expected to be judged and had already prepared his response. Reeves decided to bypass the expected approach. "When I was 14, she said, her voice measured and calm, "my father took me sailing off the coast of Maine. An unexpected storm blew in, 40-knot winds, 8-foot swells, visibility down to nothing. I was terrified." Hayes turned slightly, his expression betraying momentary confusion at this unexpected direction. "My father was completely calm," Reeves continued. "He handed me the tiller and said, 'Keep us pointed into the wind.' Then he went forward to secure the jib. I thought he was crazy, trusting our survival to me while he did the more technical work." She paused, letting the salt air fill the space between them. "Later, when we were safe in harbor, I asked him why he'd done that. Why risk both our lives by trusting an inexperienced sailor with the most critical task? Do you know what he said?" Hayes studied her, clearly trying to determine where this story was leading. "What did he say?" "He said, because I couldn't do both jobs at once, and I needed to trust someone else with the thing I couldn't control." Reeves turned to face Hayes directly. "Yesterday, you demonstrated exceptional leadership under limitation. It contradicted patterns we'd observed in your earlier performances." Hayes's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "With respect, specialist, if you are questioning my consistency, I'm questioning your motivation," Reeves interrupted gently. "You've demonstrated two distinct operational modes. In standard scenarios, you consistently position yourself at the critical execution point, often at unnecessary personal risk. But when physically prevented from doing so, you display remarkable trust in your team's capabilities. The inconsistency suggests that your default approach isn't driven by tactical necessity, but by something else." For several moments, Hayes was silent, his eyes returning to the distant horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its practiced formality. "My brother once told me that our father had a saying, 'Hayes men are meant to be at the tip of the spear.' 3 generations of naval service, each one pushing further toward the most elite units, the most dangerous missions." He exhaled slowly. "Bradley believed it literally, that our worth was measured by our proximity to danger. I understood it differently." "How so?" Reeves prompted. "The tip of the spear isn't just the first point of contact. It's also the point that depends entirely on the shaft behind it for direction and force." Hayes turned to face her fully. "My brother failed to grasp that. He sought the position without understanding the responsibility. And you..." "I seek the responsibility, not just the position." Hayes's gaze was steady, direct. "If that means being at the front, I'll be at the front. If it means directing from behind, I'll direct from behind. The mission determines the requirement, not my ego." Reeves considered his words, weighing them against what she had observed during the training scenarios. There was a ring of truth to his statement, but also a carefully constructed quality that suggested he was presenting his most polished self-assessment. "Yesterday's scenario was deliberately designed to test that philosophy," she acknowledged. "You performed admirably, but it leaves me with one final question, Lieutenant, which is, if you're selected for DevGru, you'll be operating alongside the most elite special warfare operators in the world. Men and women who have proven themselves in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. How will you reconcile your drive for operational control with the reality of serving alongside others who may be equally qualified to take point position. It was the fundamental question, the one that would determine whether Hayes was truly suited for the unit, that demanded both exceptional individual capability and seamless team integration. His answer would significantly influence her final recommendation. Hayes didn't respond immediately. Instead, he seemed to genuinely consider the question, looking past the prepared answers that had served him well throughout the selection process. Before officer candidate school, he said finally, I served with a team leader who had a unique approach to mission planning. For high-risk operations, he would assign each team member as the primary executor for a different phase, not based on their individual strengths, but specifically targeting their areas of relative weakness. Reeves raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this unorthodox method. His philosophy was that elite units don't succeed because each operator performs their specialized role perfectly. They succeed because each operator can perform any role effectively when circumstances demand it. Hayes's expression had softened, revealing a glimpse of genuine respect. He called it distributed excellence, rather than concentrated expertise. An interesting approach, Reeves acknowledged. How did it affect team performance? Initially, it was uncomfortable, frustrating even. We all wanted to showcase our strengths, not expose our weaknesses. But over time, it created a team with remarkable adaptive capacity. There were no critical vulnerability points because every operator had experienced and overcome the discomfort of operating outside their optimal role. He paused, then added, that team leader was killed during my second deployment, IED strike on our convoy in northern Iraq. His lessons stayed with me, though I haven't always applied them as consistently as I should. For the first time in their interactions, Reeves sensed she was seeing the authentic William Hayes, not the carefully constructed officer candidate, not the brother trying to distinguish himself from a family legacy, but the man who had experienced both the theoretical and practical realities of special operations. Thank you for your candor, Lieutenant, she said simply. I believe I have what I need for my assessment. As they walked back toward the administrative section of the base, neither spoke further about the evaluation. Instead, their conversation turned to more general aspects of special operations doctrine, the evolving nature of asymmetrical warfare, and the psychological demands of high-stress environments. It was the easy dialogue of professionals who, despite differences in experience and perspective, shared a common language and purpose. They were approaching the main training complex when Reeves's secure communication device vibrated with an urgent alert. Simultaneously, Hayes received a similar notification. Both checked their devices, exchanging a brief glance of surprise and concern. Command Center immediate recall, Reeves read aloud. All DevGru candidates and evaluation staff. Priority Alpha, Hayes added, reading from his own device. Live mission briefing status. They increased their pace without further discussion, years of operational conditioning translating the cryptic message into a clear imperative. Something had happened, something that transcended the boundaries of training and evaluation. When they arrived at the command center, they found Sullivan already present, along with Santiago Dr. Chen and the base's commanding officer, Captain Reynolds. The DevGru candidates were assembling in ordered rows, their expressions serious but controlled. Sullivan gestured Reeves to join the senior staff at the front of the room. As she took her position, she noted the large secure display screen showing what appeared to be satellite imagery of a coastal region, though the location identifier had been deliberately obscured. Once all personnel were present and the room was secured, Sullivan addressed the assembled group. At 0430 hours this morning, a United States Navy research vessel, the USNS Henderson, was boarded and seized while operating in international waters. The vessel was conducting oceanographic research, but also carried classified communications equipment and 16 civilian technical specialists with security clearances. He activated a control and the display shifted to show thermal imaging of a ship with smaller craft surrounding it. Initial intelligence indicates the boarding was conducted by a non-state actor with ties to regional terrorist organizations. Satellite surveillance confirms the vessel is being held approximately 22 nautical miles offshore. The aggressors have made no communication attempts and appear to be maintaining communication silence while preparing the vessel for transport to an unknown location. The room remained absolutely silent as Sullivan continued. Due to the sensitive nature of both the personnel and equipment aboard Joint Special Operations Command has authorized an immediate recovery operation. Given proximity and readiness status, Naval Special Warfare has been tasked with primary execution. He paused, looking across the assembled candidates with evaluative precision. Under normal circumstances, this operation would be assigned exclusively to current DevGru operators. However, operational tempo and deployment schedules have created a temporary personnel shortage. The current assessment is that successful execution will require additional operators beyond those immediately available. Now, Sullivan's gaze shifted specifically to the candidates in the front row, including Hayes. You are in the final phase of DevGru selection because you represent the most capable operators available. This is no longer an evaluation. This is a live mission with real consequences. Your participation is voluntary but essential to operational success. The implication was clear. The training scenario had become reality. The candidates were being offered the opportunity to prove their capabilities not in simulation, but in genuine combat conditions where lives hung in the balance. Those willing to volunteer will receive detailed mission briefing immediately. Those who decline will return to standard selection protocols with no negative evaluation impact. Decision time is now. Not a single candidate hesitated. As one, they stepped forward, signaling their willingness to participate in the high-risk operation. Sullivan nodded, unsurprised but clearly satisfied. Mission planning begins in 30 minutes. Specialist Reeves will serve as operation controller with Master Chief Santiago as tactical advisor. Lieutenant Hayes, based on your performance metrics during selection, you will serve as team leader for the secondary assault element. Hayes's expression revealed nothing beyond professional acknowledgement, but Reeves could sense the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This was no longer about evaluation or selection. It was about operational excellence in conditions where failure meant the loss of American lives. As the room reorganized for mission briefing, Sullivan drew Reeves aside. "This wasn't planned," he said quietly, "but it's the kind of real-world test no training scenario can replicate, for Hayes and for you." Reeves understood the subtext. This mission would serve as both Hayes's final qualification for DevGru and her own test of readiness to return to operational status. "I'm clear on the parameters, Master Chief," she replied, "both operational and evaluative." Sullivan studied her with the perceptive gaze that had made him legendary throughout the Naval Special Warfare community. "Are you certain you're ready for this, Specialist? There's no shame in acknowledging if you need more time." The question touched directly on the doubts that had shadowed Reeves since Mosul. Was she truly ready to return to the world of split-second decisions with lives hanging in the balance? The nightmares had diminished but not disappeared. The momentary flashbacks still occurred during high-stress training scenarios, but something had shifted during these weeks of evaluation. In studying Hayes and recognizing both his strengths and the shadows that motivated him, she had gained new perspective on her own operational psychology. "I'm ready," she said simply, and for the first time since that night in Mosul, she believed it completely. The mission briefing was comprehensive but efficient, delivered with the no-nonsense clarity that characterized special operations planning. The USNS Henderson was a converted cargo vessel, retrofitted for oceanographic research, but retaining much of its original configuration. This provided both challenges and opportunities for the assault team. Intelligence indicated approximately 12 to 15 hostile forces aboard with the American crew and technical specialists believed to be confined in the ship's secure communications center. The primary concern was that the aggressors would execute hostages if they detected a rescue attempt or destroy the classified equipment to prevent its recovery. The operation would consist of two phases. The primary assault team, composed of available DevGru operators, would insert via fast rope from helicopters onto the forward section of the vessel. Simultaneously, the secondary team, led by Hayes and composed of selected candidates, would approach by rigid hull inflatable boats inboard from the stern. Reeves would coordinate the operation from an airborne command platform, maintaining communication with both teams and integrating real-time intelligence from surveillance assets. As the teams prepared their equipment and conducted final rehearsals, Reeves observed Hayes with professional interest. He had seamlessly transitioned from candidate to operational leader, briefing his team with clear, concise instructions that left no room for misinterpretation. There was none of the ego-driven positioning she had observed in earlier training scenarios. Instead, he demonstrated the balanced leadership approach she had glimpsed during the simulated injury exercise. When Hayes approached her with a tactical question about synchronizing his team's movement with the primary assault element, she noted the focused calm in his eyes. "You seem remarkably composed for someone about to lead their first DevGru-level operation," she observed. Hayes checked the secure communication device that would link him to the command platform. "Not my first high-risk extraction specialist, just the first with this particular team composition. Any concerns about the personnel assigned to you?" He considered the question seriously. "They're all technically proficient, but we haven't established the nonverbal communication patterns that develop through extended operations together. I've adjusted the tactical plan to account for that, emphasizing clear verbal commands and simplified movement patterns. It was a pragmatic assessment, neither overconfident nor unnecessarily cautious." Reeves found herself nodding in approval. "One final question, Lieutenant. If the situation deteriorates and you're forced to choose between personnel recovery and equipment security, what's your priority?" It was a deliberate test, one final evaluation before committing to the operation. Hayes didn't hesitate. "Personnel first always. Equipment can be replaced or destroyed to prevent compromise. The technical specialists represent both human value and irreplaceable knowledge assets." His answer aligned perfectly with operational doctrine, but it was the conviction behind the words that convinced Reeves of his readiness. As twilight descended, the assault teams boarded their transportation assets. The operation would execute under cover of darkness, using the new moon to maximize stealth advantage. Reeves took her position in the command aircraft, a modified P-8 Poseidon, equipped with advanced surveillance and communication systems. From her elevated perspective, she would have the clearest operational picture, responsible for integrating information from multiple sources and providing real-time guidance to the assault teams. It was a role that required both tactical expertise and strategic judgment, the ability to see both the immediate action and its broader context. As the aircraft reached its station, Reeves performed final communications checks with both assault elements. Hayes's voice came through with perfect clarity, professionally detached but conveying the controlled intensity of pre-mission focus. "Chalk 2 comms check, 5 by 5. Confirmed Chalk 2, operation timeline remains as briefed. Insertion in 12 minutes. Through the aircraft's sophisticated sensor suite, Reeves could observe the target vessel in multiple spectrums. Thermal imaging showed human figures moving on the deck, sentries maintaining watch positions. Other figures remained below decks, clustered in what intelligence had identified as the secure communications center. The assault boats carrying Hayes' team were now visible, maintaining stealth approach protocol, minimal wake, reduced engine signature, following the natural wave patterns to mask their movement. The helicopters carrying the primary assault team had initiated their final approach, running dark until the last possible moment. All elements execute, countdown initiated. Assault in 10 minutes. The practiced precision of special operations now unfolded with clockwork efficiency. Support elements moved into position. Surveillance assets confirmed no changes in the target situation. The assault teams made final equipment checks. At precisely the designated time the operation launched, the helicopters appeared suddenly above the forward section of the vessel, disgorging operators who descended on fast ropes with fluid speed. Simultaneously, Hayes' boats reached the stern, his team scaling the hull using specialized maritime boarding equipment. Through her command console, Reeves tracked both elements as they breached the vessel's exterior and began their coordinated movement through the interior spaces. The initial phase proceeded exactly according to plan. No resistance encountered, no alarm raised, perfect execution of the stealth protocol. Chalk 1 has cleared the bridge. Proceeding to objective Alpha Barn, came the report from the primary team leader. Chalk 2 has secured the engineering spaces. Moving to containment positions. Hayes reported, his voice betraying no tension despite the high-stakes environment. Reeves maintained the operational rhythm, issuing brief acknowledgments and updating both teams on the movements of hostile forces as detected by the aircraft's sensors. The operation was proceeding with textbook precision, until it wasn't. "Command Chalk 2, we have a situation." Hayes' voice remained controlled, but Reeves detected the subtle shift that indicated unexpected complications. "3 hostiles moving toward the communications center with what appears to be demolition equipment. Assessment, they're preparing to destroy the classified systems." This changed the operational timeline dramatically. If the hostiles reached the communications center before either assault team, both the technical equipment and potentially the hostages would be lost. Understood, Chalk 2. Primary team is still 2 decks above that position. You're closer. Assessment. Hayes's response was immediate but measured. We can intercept, but it will expose our presence before the primary team has secured the command level. Recommendation: we move to immediate interdiction while primary team accelerates their timeline. It was the correct tactical assessment, but it would fundamentally alter the operation's carefully planned sequence. The decision fell to Reeves as operation controller. In that moment of decision, she felt none of the paralyzing doubt that had plagued her since Mosul. The operational picture was clear. The options distinct, the priority unambiguous. This was what she had been trained for, what she excelled at: the ability to process complex tactical situations and make decisive judgments under extreme pressure. Chalk 2, execute interdiction. Chalk 1, accelerate to phase 2, immediate. All elements, we are now in dynamic execution protocol. The acknowledgments came back instantly, both teams adapting to the changed circumstances without hesitation. Through the sensor feed, Reeves watched as Hayes's team altered their movement pattern, taking a more direct but exposed route to intercept the hostiles approaching the communications center. What followed was a demonstration of elite special operations capability at its finest. Hayes positioned his team at the optimal interdiction point, using the vessel's architecture to create a natural choke point. When the hostiles arrived, the engagement was swift, decisive, and controlled, all 3 neutralized without alerting the remaining hostile forces. Chalk 2, hostiles neutralized, demolition equipment secured, proceeding to communications center, outer perimeter. Almost simultaneously, the primary team reported successfully securing the command level, neutralizing the hostile leadership element. The operation had shifted from stealth to direct action, but maintained its precision and focus. As both teams converged on the communications center, Reeves coordinated their final approach to ensure there was no risk of friendly fire or tactical interference. The culminating breach and hostage extraction, executed with flawless coordination, the 2 teams functioning as a single integrated unit, despite having never trained together. Command objectives secured. 16 personnel recovered, all intact. Classified equipment preserved. Vessel control established. Awaiting extraction protocol. The relief in the command aircraft was palpable but restrained. Professional satisfaction rather than celebration. An operation executed under difficult circumstances with optimal outcomes. As the recovery phase began, with medical personnel attending to the freed hostages and security teams processing the neutralized hostiles, Reeves maintained her operational focus, coordinating the complex extraction sequence that would return all personnel to secure facilities. Hours later, with the operation complete and all teams safely returned to base, the formal debriefing began. Senior officers from multiple commands had arrived to assess the operation's execution and implications. The successful recovery of both personnel and classified equipment represented a significant strategic victory, preventing both human tragedy and potential intelligence compromise. When Hayes delivered his team's portion of the operational summary, he did so with the same balanced precision that had characterized his leadership during the mission itself. He highlighted the contributions of each team member, acknowledged the adaptation points where planned procedures had been modified for circumstance, and presented clear assessments of what had worked and what could be improved in future operations. There was no trace of the ego-driven positioning Reeves had observed during early training scenarios. Instead, she saw a leader who had integrated the lessons of distributed excellence, who understood that true operational effectiveness came not from individual heroics but from synchronized capability. As the debriefing concluded, Sullivan approached where Reeves stood, reviewing the final after-action documentation. "Your assessment of Lieutenant Hayes," he asked without preamble. Reeves considered the question, thinking back to her initial concerns, the evolution she had observed during training, and finally the performance under genuine operational conditions. "He's ready for DevGru," she said with conviction. "His technical skills were never in question, but he's demonstrated the leadership maturity and team integration capability that the unit requires." Sullivan nodded, satisfied with the assessment. "And what about you, Specialist? Are you ready to return to operational status?" The question no longer carried the weight of uncertainty it once had. The mission had confirmed what Reeves had begun to recognize during the evaluation process, that her experience in Mosul, while traumatic, had added to her operational capability rather than diminishing it. The hypervigilance that had manifested as flashbacks in controlled settings had transformed into enhanced situational awareness in genuine operations. Yes, Master Chief, I'm ready. Good, because DevGru has requested both of you. Hayes for his demonstrated leadership under complex conditions, and you for your operational control capabilities. The formal orders will arrive tomorrow. The news was unexpected but not unwelcome. DevGru represented the pinnacle of special operations capability, the unit tasked with the most sensitive and critical missions. For Reeves, it offered the opportunity to apply her hard-won experience in contexts where it would make the most difference. For Hayes, it represented both personal achievement and redemption for the family name his brother had tarnished. Later that evening, as the base settled back into its normal rhythm, Reeves found herself once again at the observation point overlooking the Pacific. The endless horizon offered perspective, a reminder that any single mission, any individual career was part of something larger and more enduring. She sensed rather than heard Hayes' approach, a testament to his fieldcraft, but also to her own heightened awareness. Specialist, he acknowledged, joining her at the railing. Lieutenant, congratulations on the DevGru selection. Hayes nodded his thanks. It's an honor, one I'm determined to fulfill appropriately. I believe you will, Reeves replied, and found she meant it sincerely. The Hayes she had observed during the mission was a leader she would willingly operate alongside in the most demanding circumstances. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, two operators who had tested each other and emerged with mutual respect. I owe you my thanks, Hayes said finally. Your evaluation pushed me to confront aspects of my operational approach that needed refinement. Without that, today might have gone very differently. The capacity for growth was already there, Reeves observed. It just needed the right circumstances to emerge. Perhaps. But recognition is the first step toward adaptation. Hayes turned slightly, studying her with genuine curiosity. May I ask a personal question, Specialist? You may ask. I reserve the right not to answer. A small smile touched his lips, acknowledging the fair boundary. During our mission, you made split-second decisions with absolute clarity. No hesitation, no second-guessing, despite the high stakes. Is that something that comes naturally or something you developed through experience? The question touched on something fundamental about operational psychology, about the mental framework that allowed for effective function under extreme pressure. Both, Reeves admitted. There's a natural predisposition, certainly, but the refined capability comes through experience, both success and failure. She paused, considering how much to reveal of her own journey. After Mosul, I questioned that capability, wondered if trauma had compromised it permanently. Today confirmed that it hasn't. If anything, it's been enhanced by a deeper understanding of consequences. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. The burden of command never gets lighter, does it? We just develop stronger shoulders to carry it. Well put, Lieutenant. As they parted ways, each preparing for the new chapter that awaited them in DevGru, Reeves reflected on the strange symmetry of their journeys. Hayes had moved beyond the shadow of his brother's failure to establish his own operational identity. She had confronted the specter of Mosul and reclaimed her confidence in her own judgment. Both had emerged stronger, more complete operators, not despite their challenges, but because of them. The following week, when the official DevGru induction ceremony concluded, Fleet Master Chief Sullivan found Reeves observing the proceedings from a discreet distance. Not one for formal ceremonies, Specialist? He asked, joining her in the shadows. They have their place, Master Chief. Just not sure it's my place. Sullivan chuckled, understanding her preference for operational substance over institutional pageantry. You made the right call on Hayes. His performance during the mission confirmed everything your evaluation suggested. He's a good operator. He'll serve DevGru well. As will you in your new role as operations controller. Sullivan's weathered face creased in a rare smile. Though I suspect you'll find yourself back in the field before long, some operators are simply meant to be where the action is. Reeves didn't disagree. For all her skill in operational control positions, the direct action environment was where she felt most alive, most purposeful. It was a calling as much as a profession. There's a deployment coming up, Sullivan continued. Sensitive operation details still classified. But they're assembling a team with your specific skill set. Interested? The question didn't require consideration. Despite everything she had experienced, or perhaps because of it, Reeves knew where she belonged. Not behind a desk, not in a control room, but in the field where her capabilities made the most direct difference. Always, Master Chief. As she walked away, Reeves reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From the young woman determined to prove herself in a male-dominated field to the seasoned operator, whose quiet competence had become legendary, to the wounded warrior, who had questioned her own capabilities, and finally to this moment of renewed purpose and clarity. The legend of Specialist Alexandra Alex Reeves would continue to grow, not through self-promotion or dramatic gestures, but through the same quiet excellence that had defined her from the beginning. In the world of elite special operations, where the most important work happened in shadows and silence, she had found her true calling. For it is not the loud proclamations of ability that define true excellence, but the silent, consistent demonstration of capability when it matters most. In the deadly silence of critical operations, Reeves had found not just her profession, but her purpose. And in that purpose, she had found peace.